My name is Colleen and I'm an educator at the St. Louis Art Museum. Welcome to Wednesday. Today we're going to be talking about the moon. Have you ever looked way up in the sky, up at the moon? What do you wonder about the moon? We'll start by reading a story together, then we'll be looking at some art from the museum's collection, and we'll end by making our own art together. Feel free to pause the video at any time if you'd like to get a closer look, if you'd like to talk about something with the people that you're with, or if you need to gather some art supplies. Are you ready? Let's get started. Today, we're going to be reading a story called A Big Mooncake for Little Star. If you've joined me for Wee Wednesday before, you may know that when I read a new book, I like to take a look at the cover to see if I can find out some things about the story before I read. Let's take a look at this cover together. What do you notice? I see a few different clues on this cover. My first clue is this big one right here in the middle. I see a really big circle that's yellow. It looks like it has some other colors on it as well. And I notice there's a piece missing of the circle. And I see a child here. It looks like they're taking a big bite out of the circle. Based on their face, it looks like they might be pretty happy about what it is that they're eating. I also notice that the rest of the background is a really dark color, but there's tiny little specks all around. It's making me wonder what those might be. What do you think the story might be about, based on what we can see? Let's find out. A Big Mooncake for Little Star by Grace Lin. Little Star's mama laid the big mooncake onto the night sky to cool. "Now, Little Star," Mama said, "your mooncake took us a long time to bake, so let's see if you can make it last a while. Can you remember not to touch this big mooncake until I tell you to?" "Yes, Mama," Little Star said, nodding. A mooncake, which we can see the mama is holding right here, is a pastry that's filled with sweet bean or lotus seed paste, and it's traditionally eaten during the Mid-Autumn Festival, which is also known as the Moon Festival. It's celebrated by many East and Southeast Asian people during the fall, and when they believe that the moon is at its most bright and full. And Little Star remembered as she brushed her teeth, washed her face, and snuggled into bed, and fell asleep. Have you ever had to wait for something for a really long time that you really wanted? How did that make you feel? How do you think Little Star might feel? But in the middle of the night, Little Star woke up. She forgot everything her mama had said and only remembered the big mooncake. Sometimes when I'm reading a story, I like to predict what's going to happen on the next page based on what we've already read. What do you think is going to happen next? Let's find out. pat, pat. Little Star's soft feet tiptoed to the big mooncake. Would her mama notice if she took a tiny nibble? Little Star didn't think so. Yum. I want you to imagine your favorite thing to eat. Do you have that thing in your mind? Imagine taking a taste of that really tasty thing that you love to eat. Maybe you might even say, yum, like Little Star did in the story. Let's try that together. Maybe you might rub your stomach while you say, Ready? Yum. We might be doing some other tasting in the story, so you can join me in doing that if you like. But was someone coming? Little Star flew back to bed. The next night, Little Star remembered the big mooncake again. That one bite had been so sweet and tasty. Was the cake still there? Yes, it was. There was that big mooncake, an almost perfect circle, all alone and delicious in the sky. Would her mama notice if she took another tiny nibble? Little Star didn't think so. Yum! Little Star flew back to bed. All right, let's take another little taste. Ready? Yum. And the next night, what do you think Little Star remembered? The big mooncake, of course. Would Mama notice if she took another tiny nibble? Little Star didn't think so. Yum! Let's take another taste. Yum! And the night after that, what did Little Star do? Nibble, nibble, yum! Let's take another taste. Yum! Night after night, Little Star took tiny nibble after tiny nibble of the big mooncake. What do you notice is happening to the mooncake night after night? Do these shapes remind you of anything? Until one night, Little Star's mama went to look for the big mooncake. Where was it? It was gone. Instead of a glowing round cake, there was just a trail of twinkling crumbs. Little Star, her mama said, shaking her head, even though her mouth was curving. You ate the big mooncake again, didn't you? Little Star looked up, her grin reflecting her mama's smile. Yes, Mama, Little Star said, nodding. Now let's go make another one. The end. I invite you to think about your favorite part of the story and talk about that with the people that you're with. We're going to travel to the museum now to look at some works of art. Let's imagine how we might get there. Since we're talking about the moon today, let's imagine that the museum is on the surface of the moon. Are you going to take a giant rocket ship to get there? Or are you going to take a small rover, which is a vehicle that's designed to drive on the surface of the moon? Or are you going to walk there in your spacesuit? You decide. Once you've decided, if you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself going. Whew, that was a really out of this world journey today. I'm really glad that we made it. In order to get ready to look at our works of art, we're going to be doing an experience I'm calling our Mindfulness Minute. Mindfulness is taking the time to slow down and really pay attention to what you're doing. We've been talking about the moon today and how it can inspire us and fill us with wonder. We're going to take a journey in our imaginations today to be mindful, and we'll be thinking about the moon. To start, let's get into a comfortable position. Let's get out any wiggles before we start to settle our minds and our bodies. So if it feels comfortable, wiggle anything that you feel like you need to get out. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Now let's take a deep breath in through our nose and out through our mouths. Let's try that one more time, but this time let's do it a little more slowly. Ready? In through your nose and out through your mouth. If you'd like, you can close your eyes. Imagine that it's nighttime. It's dark outside, but there's a bright light shining up above from the moon. Take a look up in the sky. What do you see? Let's take a close look at the moon. What do you notice about its shape or its color? Or even if you look really closely, what does its surface look like? If it feels comfortable, let's raise our arms above our head into the shape of a full moon. If you'd like, you can sway from side to side. Then come back to center and slowly bring your arms back down. Let's try that again. Bring your arms slowly up above your head into the shape of a full moon. Now imagine that bright light from the moon filling you up inside. Take a deep breath in through your nose. And as you breathe out, bring your arms back down. Let's take one more breath while we're in the glow of the moonlight. In through your nose and out through your mouth. You can maybe wiggle those fingers and toes, wiggle your arms, or sway your head from side to side, just to start thinking about coming back. If you'd like, you can open your eyes. I feel much more ready to look at some really amazing works of art. We're going to look at some works of art from the museum's collection together. If you'd like, you can scroll down on the page to get a closer look at the images we'll be viewing. Feel free to pause the video at any time to do this. Take a close look at this work of art. What do you see? Let's zoom in to get a closer look. What new details can you see now? Let's zoom in one last time. What's going on in this picture? Let's follow the gaze of these two people at the bottom of the painting. What do you think they're looking at based on what we can see? This is a hanging scroll painting made by a Chinese artist. It's called Viewing the Moon Under a Pine Tree. A hanging scroll is meant to be displayed for a period of time, and then it is rolled up and stored away so another one can take its place. Hanging scrolls are often displayed during a particular season or for a special occasion. Imagine a time when you looked at the moon. How did you feel? How do you imagine the two people in the painting might be feeling? Let's see how another work of art pictures the moon. Take a close look at this work of art. What do you wonder about it? Let's zoom in to get a closer look. What new details can you see now? This is a photograph taken by an astronaut named Neil Armstrong. It's called Apollo 11 Moon Landing. Did you know people have actually been to the moon? Neil Armstrong was one of the first people to go to the moon on the Apollo 11 mission over 50 years ago. He took this photograph with a special camera that was worn around his neck. In the photograph, we can see another astronaut, Buzz Aldrin, conducting scientific experiments. Behind him is the landing capsule called the Lunar Module Eagle that brought them to the moon from their larger spacecraft. How do you think Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin felt as the first people on the moon? Let's take a look at another photograph that Neil Armstrong took. What do you notice about the surface of the moon? What words would you use to describe it? This is a photograph by Neil Armstrong of his foot as he was walking on the moon's surface. Imagine walking on the moon's surface. How does the ground feel below you? The moon is a wondrous place that inspires many. Whether you're looking up from the Earth, like in the Chinese hanging scroll painting, or walking on the moon's surface, like Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong in the photographs, there's much to discover. What will you create inspired by the moon? If you'd like, you can talk about your ideas with the people that you're with. Now that we looked at some art together, let's travel back home so we can make our own art. So hop in your rocket ship, or get in that rover and drive on the moon's surface, or walk in your spacesuit, and let's head home. For our art making project today, we are going to be making our own paintings inspired by the moon using watercolors and salt. We've been exploring the many ways that people are inspired by the moon and even have seen some photographs of its surface. So we're going to create paintings inspired by that surface using a technique with watercolors and salt. So for our project today, we're going to need a few different materials. First, we're going to need some paper. Any kind of paper you have at home is fine. I would try to find the thickest paper that you have since we're going to be using watercolors today. Any color you want to use is fine. I'm going to be using some white paper today. We're also going to need a scissors. That's optional, but if you'd like to cut your paper into a different shape, you'll need a scissors to do that, or you can just rip it. Other materials we're going to need are a paintbrush, if you have a paintbrush. If you don't have a paintbrush, you could also use a sponge. You might need a cup with some water in it to rinse our brush out, a paper towel or a rag if you want to kind of dry off your brush in between using colors. We're going to need some salt. I just have regular old salt, so any kind of salt that you have at home is fine. And we're going to need some watercolors. So there's a few different ways we can use watercolors. You can either use watercolors that you buy at the store, or you can actually make your own watercolors using some things that you might have at home. So one way to do that is to mix water with food coloring. So I have some food coloring here. This is a blue food coloring, and you don't need very many drops. Just one or two is fine. into a small dish of water or plastic cup or whatever you have at home. And then I'm just going to mix it with my brush. And now I have some blue watercolors. Another thing that we can do to make watercolors is actually do some recycling of a material that we might throw away. So these are some markers that were kind of drying out. They weren't really working very well anymore. So what you can do is you can actually soak them in a glass of water. And this took a few hours. And when you take them out, after they've been soaking in water for a little bit, I'm just going to put them in a bag. Now I have this purple blue watercolor that I can use to paint with. So you can use all the same color marker. If you have a bunch of dried out markers that are the same color, you can mix colors. This was a combination of blue and purple. And that's another way that you can turn something that was going to be thrown away into paint. So those are a few different ways that we can make our own liquid watercolors. So to start our moon paintings, first I'm going to take my sheet of paper, and if you'd like, you can actually cut your paper into the shape of the moon before you start. So this can be a great research project you can do with your grown-ups if you want to look into the phases of the moon. And they all have different names and they're different shapes and sizes. So I decided that I want my moon to be a full moon for this painting. So I'm going to cut my sheet of paper into a circle. And that can be kind of tricky sometimes to cut paper that's square into a circle. So an easy way to do it is to fold whatever piece of paper you have in half and then to just cut a half circle. So I'm going to do that and we're going to see what it looks like. You can also draw before you cut. So now I have kind of this circular shape. And if you don't like what it looks like, you can also kind of trim it, but that can be kind of an easy way to get yourself started. And remember, your moon gets to look exactly the way that you want it to look. You're the artist, so it doesn't have to look exactly like a picture that you saw, or even if someone tells you that's the way the moon looks, it gets to look the way that you want it to look. So I think I'm happy with kind of this moon shape for my full moon here. So I'm going to take my paper scraps and save those for another art making day. So now I have my circular moon shape and I'm ready to add some color. So I have my food coloring watercolors, I have my markers, my dried out marker watercolors, and I'm going to paint kind of a blue purple moon. And you can think about that when you're deciding what colors you want to use. When you look at the moon, sometimes it looks blue or purple, sometimes it looks yellow or orange or red, or it can look whatever way you want it to look. So I'm just going to add some color. I might do some color mixing. And what's really important about the project that we're doing today with salt is we kind of have to work a little faster than maybe we normally would so that we can get the reaction from the salt that we want. So I'm going to add my color, and you notice I'm adding kind of a lot of watercolor, and that's going to be important for this project to make our paper really wet. So wherever you're working, make sure that you can get a little messy or get the table wet. I have some plastic down on the table here, so you can always do that if you want to protect whatever surface you're working on. So I'm adding kind of some purple, and I'm just whooshing the color around. And watercolors are kind of fun to experiment with, to kind of see where you can add those pools of water, how the water is going to react with the paper. So see, I'm just tapping and adding some different kind of pools of color here. So now I have my colored moon here, and my paper is really wet, which is good. We want our paper to be really wet for this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take our salt and we're actually going to sprinkle it onto the paper. And you can sprinkle it all over. You can just sprinkle it in areas. And what's going to happen is we're going to see what happens as the salt starts to absorb, or it starts to collect actually, a lot of the water and the paint, which is what you can kind of see happening here. So I'm adding mine in kind of patches. I was kind of thinking about when I look at the moon sometimes I kind of see patches of darkness or light. So I kind of wanted to use that as inspiration for my painting. And this is just regular salt, so you could also do this as an experiment. So artists often are experimenting with the materials that they use, and scientists experiment. So you could test out different kinds of salt, or different amounts of water, or different kinds of watercolors. There's so many different ways that you could turn this into an artistic and a scientific experiment. Okay, so I have my salt kind of in different areas. We can already see how the salt is absorbing a lot of the paint. So it's kind of sucking up the water that we had from our paint. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to let this sit for a little while, and then we're going to come back and we're going to see what happens. Okay, so it's been about 30 minutes since I did my moon painting here, and you can see that the salt has absorbed a lot of the water and of the paint. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to brush off a lot of the salt. So you can do that if you want, or you can leave it if you like the way the salt looks. And you'll notice it's created all this really interesting patterns and textures, and it really reminds me of the surface of the moon when I think about that photograph that we looked at together that Neil Armstrong took. So I'm just going to brush off the salt. You can see it comes off really easy because it's all dry now. And you're also left with a lot of colorful salt, which should definitely not be eaten, but could be used for another art project or something like that. Maybe make some moon rocks or something. Okay. So I've brushed off a lot of the salt, and now I'm left with my moon painting using watercolor and salt. Thank you for joining me today here at Wee Wednesday. We hope you had fun. I wanted to show you another example of a moon salt watercolor painting that I made. So this is the one that we made together. This was my full blue moon that I used food coloring and dried out marker watercolors and added all that salt, and we could see the reaction that happened after a little bit of drying time. Then I decided to make some other moon paintings, and this time I cut my paper into different shapes, and I was thinking about moon phases. So that's something that you could do with your grown-up, is think about researching the phases of the moon. So I decided to cut out some different shapes and use different colors, and I added my salt, so you can kind of see the salt reaction happening on those as well. And I decided to just glue these to a grocery bag, so that's something else you can do if you want to make a bunch of paintings, is to glue them to a larger piece of paper that you have around your home. We would love to see your moon salt paintings. You can share them with us on social media and use the hashtag STLArtMuseum and Wee Wednesday. We hope to see you next time. Keep on creating. Bye.